they could email around 40% fewer people and make the exact same amount of money.
It's more about the personalization of the actual product rather than the personalization of the message.
It's the change up of information, the change up of outreach that actually spurs lots of reaction.
Where the data tells a story that's gotta be told. It's the art and the science, getting the numbers right.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Brandformance. Today we are going to be talking to Daniel Brady. He also goes by DB, so you'll hear that acronym throughout this episode. DB is the co-CEO at Orita. Orita helps e-commerce brands do all of their lifecycle messaging through smarter machine learning and data science. Now, DB's background is special. He has a PhD in neurobiology and so understands how the human brain works and has leveraged all of that to build Orita. So let's dive in and find out how Orita and you can do better experimentation with your lifecycle messaging. All right, DB, we are finally doing this. I know this has been in the works, so I'm excited about talking to an actual neuroscientist. Is that right? Did I get that right?
That's right. Yeah. My background is in neuroscience. I was a neuroscientist for a long time and then left academia around 12 years ago and been a machine learning engineer ever since. But yeah, I'm an actual neuroscientist. So yeah, I used to work on the brain.
There you go. So you worked on understanding how the human brain works. Then you became an ML engineer, and now you have a startup that's helping marketers do more with what they've got. So this is going to be an exciting session. Before I get into the heart of the topic, I actually love to start with this. Is there a brand's marketing that you are jealous of at the moment?
Yeah, sure. I mean, totally. There's a fashion company out of LA called Fashion Brand Company. And they're kind of irreverent and cheeky, both in the design of their clothing, but also very much in their marketing. It's very, very funny. I don't even know how to describe their clothing. Some would say it's like kind of like clown chic is probably the best way that I can describe it. And so they're very, very irreverent. They collaborate with a bunch of different artists in order to make funny TikTok videos and things like that. They actually release like a quarterly fake old-timey newspaper that's like pure comedy. And so it's almost like watching comedians who somehow started a brand. So they're an awesome company. My wife has a ton of their clothes, but I also I genuinely like the advertising when I see it. It makes me really happy. And we both laugh about their content all the time. So
that's awesome. Yeah. It's called Fashion Brand Company.
Yeah, exactly. So that gives you a hint, right? Like it's already kind of funny. The name itself is called Fashion Brand Company. Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. Okay. This is very interesting. And you said they have a clown chic style.
Yeah.
Tell me more. What does that even mean?
I mean, it kind of looks like if a very cool, kind of LA style that was informed by like the Ringling Brothers and the Ringling Circus. And so like really large collars and all this kind of stuff, like very bold patterns. Yeah, it's like a really funny, really, really cool set of clothing.
That's awesome. All right. Shout out to the Fashion Brand Company for making it in the first like 5 minutes of this podcast. Okay.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I'm going to start where like the most obvious question that's in my head for us before we talk about Orita is how did you go from neuroscience to machine learning to marketing? Like what was that journey like? Was that a conscious choice on your part? Like talk to me about that journey.
Yeah, it wasn't conscious. I mean, there are parts of it was conscious, parts of it were not, like our own brains. So I knew that I wanted to study the brain from a very long time ago. I've been obsessed with the brain since I was in middle school. I actually read a book by Michael Crichton called The Terminal Man. It's a terrible book, but it had parts of the book where they did neurosurgery and they were like stimulating parts of the brain. And the patients in the neurosurgery were like, had sensations on their fingers or their muscles were starting twitching. And I just remember being like, oh my gosh, this is where this all happens, right? Being really obsessed with that. And then when I went to undergrad, I was like, okay, this is really, really cool. We actually don't really know how it works. And so the medical aspect of it wasn't that interesting to me, more of like, let's figure out like, what are these neurons doing? How does it work? And so I went to grad school. And then I also did my postdoc. At that time, that was kind of when the concept of being a data scientist and being a machine learning engineer started to kind of bubble up. It wasn't common, like from my graduating grad school class at Harvard, like I think one other person like me kind of went into tech. Almost everyone else went into postdoc. Now it's so much more common that if you are leaving your, after academia that you would go straight into tech. But, I loved academia, but I didn't like how slow it was. Like literally my PhD was like, I discovered my main discovery my second year of my PhD, and I spent another 4 years proving that was true over and over and over and over and over again, right? And so after like partway through my postdoc, I was like, I don't know if I really can do this anymore. And so I decided to leave academia, and I was like, I know how to program. I know a lot of math and science, around neuroscience. This burgeoning field of machine learning and engineering is kind of interesting. And a friend of mine he was the CTO of a same-day delivery company. And by CTO, it was just him and another founder.
Yeah.
And I was like trying to figure out what to do. And I was like working out of their office, and they were like, hey, could you help us with a little bit of math on this problem? And it was routing couriers, right? And so I did this like little stuff, and it was like very basic statistics for me. I was like, yeah, this is how it works. I did like overnight. And then they were like, whoa, you're now a first employee. And so,
Nice.
and then I got like really addicted to the speed of technology, having an idea, testing it out in production, literally a week later, that changing fundamentally what the business was doing. We then raised a round. We then hired all these people. So that really got me like addicted to being in that sort of space. And then it's just been this interesting world of like having an experience of like really understanding that like math and science and like can deliver so much value in business. And then having all this experience with like routing and packaging and all this kind of stuff like that. And then, you obviously interact with a lot of brands, you interact with a lot of customers. And so it's just been like finding like, where do these opportunities lie? And so when Zach is also a machine learning engineer, one of my co-founders, we didn't set out to like start machine learning and marketing as where to go. What we did is we're like, where do brands need the most help, right? And we could have just easily gone on inventory planning and management if that was like where the biggest pool was. But we're just like, there's so much data that's being collected about users all the time, interacting with the brands. Brands use stuff on all sorts of different channels, collect all this information, and using such a small part of it, and admittedly not a very smart way. And we're just like, that seems like an opportunity. And so we did a few experiments there, and then those went really, really well. The brands told their friends about us, and all of a sudden we had these paying customers, and it's just been, a kind of a rocket ship ever since then.
That's awesome. And from our research, it seems like you started actually as a consulting sort of operation before you became sort of a product company. Which I think is a great path, by the way, because you get to live and breathe in the weeds of the customer's problem before you figure out how to scale it. So I love that. On that point, so today, when somebody signs up with Orita, and I'm going to give away a little bit, but I'm curious also to hear your take on this. You're essentially helping brands figure out everything on the post-sale side. Is that fair to say that it's lifecycle, CRM, email marketing?
That's right.
And essentially helping brands figure out how to run experiments to maximize the opportunity there.
That's right. Yeah. So we're like, it not necessarily might be post-sale, but it's definitely post being on their CRM list. So it could be a prospect, but like they've given up some sort of information, they've exchanged it to be email, texted, direct mail, what have you. So it's all of those kind of first-party data channels. And to your point, exactly that. It's like how to get the most out of your list at any given moment in time. And so that is not just like, who should I message more, but very strategically, who should I message less? And that has always been the big issue. Is like, it just was Black Friday ceremony not that long ago. Everyone received 10 billion emails that day. It's like, what actually makes sense in terms of marketing cadence to like not upset your customers, also get the most bang for your buck. And so how can we use math to really like understand whether or not customers want to hear from me right now, right? I think as marketers, we're very good at figuring out what we want to say. Right. And we have all these tools, all the
maybe.
We're getting better. But I think the thing that, Zach and I have thought about from first principles is like, well, once again, it's neuroscience. It's like, that's motor cortex. It's saying stuff. Who's ready to listen to your message? And that we thought was like, that's the fundamental thing that's missing, is like really trying to understand who's ready to listen to your message. Because it doesn't matter what you say if no one's ready to listen.
Yeah.
And so that's the way that we approach that problem.
Love that. And the thing that's interesting to me about that whole space, and I'm curious to hear your take, the fundamental data and I would argue even some of the tools have existed for a long time.
Yes.
And so, you've got, tools like Klaviyo or, Braze, Iterable. You pick your platform. There's so many out there. And yet I find that the level of education in the marketing world about running experiments is pretty low. So why do you think that is the case? Like when you all dug in, what did you find about this disparity, that there's amazing tech out there, a lot of them have like baked in solutions for, holdouts and incrementality testing within the platforms. And yet most marketers haven't tried them.
I think even when those structures exist, it's still really hard to implement and keep track of all of this going on. So one of the major things that we do is like, we try to have it be as simple as possible in terms of the experience for any of our brands, but we do all the work is under the hood. So like for our brands, we modify a few things in Klaviyo for them. There's new segments, there's profile properties that they can use to target much more effectively. And then under the hood, there's testing, there's holdout groups, and there's all this kind of framework. And then we just bubble up like the results from those tests and all that kind of stuff while like maintaining all the math and all the statistics and all the newest ways to do sequential A/B testing. All of that is what we take on ourselves in order to implement, so that the marketer can just be like confident that they're like actually making incremental decisions in terms of what's moving. So that's part of it. And then two, I think that like, while a lot of this stuff does exist, it typically doesn't exist to the degree of sophistication that is actually truly needed in this day, of where like you have such large sample sizes, you're doing so many things at once. That requires like an actual like very sophisticated set of testing. And so right now, like you might be able to like A/B test a flow or like an individual campaign, but like understanding how to A/B test like your entire email program, where you're sending differential content all the time, and it includes flows and it includes campaigns, is really, really hard to do. And that's why it's typically been the purvey of like Facebook and Google and Uber.
Right.
And like those like tech companies where like that's their bread and butter, is being extremely machine learning and data driven. And so our whole thesis was like, how do we like democratize that aspect of machine learning and data science to brands where it's like, you might have 5 marketers and no data scientists or machine learning, no analysts, right? Maybe you don't even have any engineers. Right. And so it's like,
even has a data warehouse, right? It's all
Exactly.
Shopify and Klaviyo.
100%. Exactly. So how can we take all that learning in this like rapidly changing and exciting space in the sort of context and the tools that the brands are already using?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so really going deep on the experimentation piece, were there sort of, the thing that's hardest to me, and we have a very similar sort of philosophy on the new customer acquisition side, which is all about optimizing your media mix, right? So things like incrementality testing and MMM, and we'll talk about sort of the science and the math there. The hardest part that I have found with our customers is also, how do you explain the data science
Totally.
and create trust so that it doesn't become a black box of like, hey, just believe us that this is working. How do you think about that? This is more also a selfish, for me to learn and understand how other people are doing this in the market.
I think, to take a step back, I think the really important thing is to understand what's the goal or the goals at any given point in time. And like a really good example of this is that like, it's not the time for incrementality testing on Black Friday.
Right.
Just message. Like they're like, what, you're going to not message 10% of your customers to learn that an email on Black Friday works. Like, you know what I mean? And so like, it's really important to understand, and like it's like a flippant example, but like actually those sorts of decisions occur all the time. And so, thinking about it from like an ML perspective or reinforcement learning perspective, like there's times for exploration and there's times for exploitation, right? Where you use the learning of the testing and stuff like that to like maximize revenue. Because there's always this fundamental tension where if you want to have precise measurement, by definition, that means that not everyone's going to see everything, right? So you're not actually maximizing the revenue that you can actually make. And so to be very clear with the brands of like, when does that happen? When does it make sense to do those sorts of things? And so what we try to do is we leverage the fact that we have segments and profile properties so we can give visibility. Hey, these are the people that are in a holdout group today. These are people that are not. We're like, this data is your data, right? When in the early stages, we would literally like package the data. We'd be like, this is all from Klaviyo, but we're like, here you go. This is the definition of statistical test that we used. Here are example code snippets. If you want to run it, like we've done everything from like, here you go. And of course, no one ever used the code, but like the fact that we were willing to be so open and upfront did it. But then I think another big thing is to also make sure that like the whole story is told. And so one of the major things that I've learned through this journey as someone who was more of a statistician is that like the statistics and the holdout test and all that kind of stuff had to kind of be like the last thing that you talk about. And you have to build up everything in order to get there. So for example, with Orita, what machine learning can really help a brand figure out is when and where to contact people in that middle to late part of the customer journey. Everyone knows what to do if someone signs up for your email list 5 minutes ago, you email them, right? But it's like, what do you do if they haven't done anything and it's been half a year or 5 years, right? Or something like that. And so in that context, like what we always do is we always like have like very specific examples. Like this is clearly a person that you would not have messaged because they didn't do anything recently or whatever. But like our algorithms have found some sort of signal, usually some sort of large integrated signal they purchase every 5 years or something along those lines. And then the brands are like, wow, like this is a very clear example of something that I would not have done, but this fits in. And we say like, where does this fit into your life cycle? Oh, these are lapsed customers, people who haven't bought for me in over a year. Arita is really good at picking up those type of people from my list that like are missed opportunities. And therefore I'm spending a lot more on Facebook to acquire new customers when there's this whole pool of people that Arita is really good at finding. When you tell that story with those examples and it fits into the framework of understanding what's happening on your list, then you can bust out the statistical testing, which is like, cool. And now at scale, because we have holdout groups and this, that, and the other, that means a lift of $1 million for you over the course of 6 months. But if you just start with that number, like it's like impossible to believe, even if everything's right. And, we've had the scenario where brands are like, listen, I don't doubt for a minute that like the statistical testing that you're doing is fine. Like it's like your values, your core part, like half your team is dedicated to that sort of stuff. It's like, but I need to understand how do you even build up from like individual profile, person level to those big numbers.
Yeah. Okay, that's very cool. And one of the challenges that I see with a lot of brands is there's a, like you kind of pointed out, there's a hesitation of doing testing, right? Like I talk about this this fictional conversation in my head. The CMO says to the CFO, hey, we got to go run this test. And the CFO's like, well, how do you know what the upside is? No, that's too risky. Let's not do more of that. Or you go and say, oh, I want to actually do a holdout. And the response is, well, that's risky. We can't like not, advertise to our audience. Like we need to know, what this is going to do or what the downside risk is. And so you end up in this analysis paralysis where you're stuck
Totally.
and not doing the level of experimentation that you should be doing. And I get it for certain times like you said, Black Friday, we'll come back to that. How do you coach your customers around that discussion? How do you sort of lead the change management? How do you get people to get more comfortable with experimentation?
Yeah. Well, I think the very first thing is to align on the type of problems that the brands want to solve. For example, a lot of brands have been emailing perhaps too many people. They've been too aggressive. And so maybe they have really low click rates. Maybe they're worried that they're in spam or they have suffering from bad deliverability. That's a lot of the reason why a lot of brands sign up with us. And so like they're aligned on the fact that like they should probably be emailing to a tighter proportion of their list. But when they tried it, they noticed that the revenue tanked or something like that. And so they're really scared in order to do that. And so when we're aligned on that, we go, cool. You understand that your 1 million person list probably shouldn't be emailing 1 million people twice a day. Okay. Do you agree with that concept? Yes. It's like, great. Our algorithms think that 200,000 people shouldn't be emailed right now. That's really scary just to do. So should we try it out with 50,000 and have 50,000 that our algorithm equally thinks are as bad, but you can keep emailing them? And then we'll look at the results in a week, in 2 weeks, in 30 days. And so like, there's like this kind of like those sorts of things. And like, there's a different version of that when it's the other side, which is like, these are people that we think you should contact right now. And they're like, how can we make sure it's incremental? There's special type of ways you can do that, both within the tools that they're using, within the testing, but it's really about like aligning right from the get-go. And so like our onboarding is quite involved as a result of that. It's like, our customer experience team really walks through with the brands, like their goals and stuff like that, to be like, how can we step function this way so that 1 month, 3 months from now, you guys are like, of course, this is like the most simple to use, obvious algorithm. It targets people extremely effectively. And I did all this sort of step-by-step testing that I'm comfortable with in order to get to that state.
Okay, I like that, and it echoes a lot of sort of how we think about it as well. The very involved, upfront discussions about your goals and your strategies and the boundaries of where you're comfortable with testing. Okay, let's maybe pick an example. Is there maybe a customer or a test that comes to mind that was like non-obvious even to you and just had tremendous results? Our audience always finds those interesting. Let's see if you have an example of that we can dig into.
Sure. I mean, so I can think of two off the top of my head. I'll talk about one that actually is what really kickstarted everything that initial experiment. So our initial experiment that we did with one of our first customers was that our algorithms were like pretty strongly suggestive that they could email around 40% fewer people and make the exact same amount of money.
Oh, okay.
So they were like, okay, let's do this for a month. And so we did it for a month and the A/B test turned out exactly as predicted. It wasn't that no one bought. It's just that email wasn't the driving factor. And like, that's the whole thing. It's not like our algorithms aren't about a general propensity to buy model. It's about a propensity to buy or click or engage, like go to the website based on that channel outreach. And so someone might not listen to email, but they might listen to text message. They might do it organically. And what happened after the result of that was like, yep, the A/B test was perfectly in our favor. It was like this, they spent the exact same amount of money, whether you emailed them or not. But the really crazy thing was that the amount of unique clicks that the brand had in that month was higher than the previous month, even though they had emailed 40% fewer people. And that was this crazy thing where, and this was accidental because Zach and I are machine learning engineers. We're not email marketers. We had stumbled upon the concept of deliverability. And because now like Gmail and Hotmail, like all of those inboxes were like, oh, the signal is so much stronger now. More the distribution of spam and promotional tab and primary inbox shifted in the brand's favor. And so now everyone was more likely to see the email than before. And so they literally made more money by emailing fewer people. And that is kind of like, you know, when we talked to Jason, who ran the brand, we were just like, hey, can you tell? He's like, I told everyone I know about you guys because like, this is crazy. And like, that actually is kind of what really prompted everything. And so like the way that we think about it is that every channel has a cost or a benefit. For direct mail and SMS, the cost is literal cost. It's expensive to use those channels. And for email is cheap, but there is this gatekeeper that prevents your messages from being seen. And that is actually what you have to be really, really smart about. So there's always like this dual optimization problem there. And that is what we were very good at like basically tackling.
Oh, that's amazing. That's a great story. And I'm sure there are some email marketers who are listening to this who are going, well, duh, we've been doing that for like, you know, many people was like intuitively because of their lived experience have come to the same conclusion. But it's not obvious when you're not an email marketer with that much experience to sit down and make a decision to not send it to 100% of your audience, but like send it to only the 40%, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that right now. We have a newsletter that goes out every week. And would I ever make the decision to send that newsletter to only 40% of the audience?
Right.
Logically, rationally, consciously, probably not. And I have to, you know, be convinced to make that call. Very cool. That's awesome. Okay, another thing that I'm going to talk about is this idea that AI is going to make all of this easier, better, faster, get rid of marketers, you know.
Right.
And I love that, by the way, you didn't use the word AI at all. You used machine learning. You know, hopefully everybody listening appreciates the difference between the two things. And let's not even talk about the definition of what is AI even. But
okay.
What do you think is happening? Because you are probably at the cutting edge of all the stuff that's happening in AI and email. And there are people who definitely have a point of view that agencies, marketers, all of that sort of labor pool is going to go away, and you're going to have this like completely agentic way of running email reactions.
Yeah, I mean, I find that hard to believe. I think that there could be parts of it that shift. For example, maybe smaller brands feel more empowered to the founder can still run their email program by themselves for a little bit longer before they need to tap into help. Like that seems very, and you know, with Klaviyo, like that's a lot of what they're doing. They're adding tooling. So it's like, yeah, you know, like maybe you needed an agency at some certain size of your brand, and maybe that's extended a little bit further nowadays. But, you know, I think the major thing to realize is that like all these tools could just mean that everything is noisier. Right. You know, like if there's more messages, more channels, all the stuff all the time, and we don't have stuff in places to make sure that like these messages are like timely and relevant, all this kind of stuff, then like what's going to happen is that it's just going to be like, I'm just going to get emails and text messages and WhatsApp messages and postcards from everybody all the time. And maybe the content of those messages are really great, but if my inbox has 10 billion of them, it doesn't matter. And so I think the major thing to realize is that like there's still like marketing is still such a critical thing. It's such a creative, it can be such a creative endeavor, which, you know, you talked about what brand do I like? And I talked about a fashion brand company, and it wasn't some sort of thing about their segmentation or this and the other. It's like, they're hilarious, right? They're very, very funny. They're a very unique voice. And that's what they're very, very good at conveying. And I don't think that sort of stuff is going to go away at all. Now, what AI and ML and all that kind of agentic stuff is like, maybe it's easier to distribute that message at scale, right? I'm very much aligned with that sort of idea. That's what we try and help our brands with. But to me, it's more like how can we take all that creative aspect that people are so good at and making sure that it's efficient and scalable and all that kind of stuff. That's where ML can really shine, as opposed to like replacing directly agencies or users or any kind of stuff. I think that like that's a bit far-fetched and like pretty unrealistic.
I'm very aligned with that. I often say that this is all about unleashing the creativity of the human beings rather than, replacing the creativity of
Totally.
human beings.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there are some pure play AGI people who are like, nah, we're all going to get rid of human beings at some point, which I know gets a lot of attention. Okay. Is there something from your neuroscience background that you've been able to apply and teach and educate marketers about? And can we talk about that, right? The stuff that is like not conscious or rational or logical.
Yeah.
Are there examples of things that you think about? How do you bring that academic thinking to the practice of testing?
In just terms in the way that Orita works, like there's, in fact, our first algorithms actually relied heavily on some of the ways in which we analyze neurons in the brain and the mathematical computation there. I actually ported those sorts of things over to marketing. We've now gone beyond those sorts of things, but it was like very efficient ways to process lots and lots of data, which is what the brain is doing. So like there are literally like lines of code. They're like, we're simulating people like neurons, and then we're looking at neuronal firing patterns. So like that's the marketers don't care about that stuff, but under the hood, that was actually what was going directly. But I think that there's a lot of concepts in terms of like social psychology and outreach and fatigue and stuff like that, and habituation that are like really, really critical. So one thing that I often try to emphasize, and this once again goes into like the human component of it, is that like our brains are very good at change detection, and they're very good at habituating very quickly. And so what's really informative is when there's a change in something. And that is something that I really like to emphasize very much when I'm talking, casually to a lot of marketers, is that like, it's the change up of information, the change up of outreach that actually spurs lots of reaction. And so you're like saying like, oh, I do this thing every single day at this time is like actually not ideal at all, because you're just like, oh yeah, it's 10 a.m. Another identical message from this brand. That's not actually what works. What works is surprise.
Hey folks, thanks for listening to this podcast today. If you're enjoying the show and if you're getting value out of it, we'd really appreciate if you'd drop us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting app. That point is fascinating, right? Because it's kind of similar to what Meta has been talking about for the last year around this concept of diversity and their new Andromeda and Gem and blah, blah, blah. This is all of this stuff which is saying, let your creative be truly diverse. And this doesn't mean it's, 3 different hooks for the same concept. It's literally different concepts that hit you in the face. And a great example of this that happened to me is I get a bunch of Instagram ads for clothes these days because I'm like changing my wardrobe. And there was this Black Friday ad from True Classic, which was hand drawn. It was like it literally just had Black Friday sale, X% off site-wide, written with a marker on a piece of paper, and that was the ad. And made me stop because nobody else is doing that. And it was different from everything else on my feed. So your point about surprise is very interesting. I like that. Do you think that marketers, when it comes to, that point about surprise, that point about sort of diversity, what percentage of marketers do you feel are doing enough in terms of diversity? And like, do you see some examples of brands that are doing a great job other than True Classic, which I just mentioned?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there definitely are plenty of marketers and brands who think about this sort of stuff. Like, we have a ton of really great agency partners. And so like, we'll talk about a little bit of strategic stuff. It's like, what we've heard recently is that a lot of plain text HTML emails from the founders do really, really well because they seem really casual and they're not like very well designed. It's like the email equivalent of what you just described. Right. And so, we have some of our brands, like Roundabout is one of our brands. And like, founder, she sends the plain text message all the time for marketing. Those emails perform extremely well in that sort of context. And so it's kind of like a relationship, all this stuff is like a relationship, right? And that relationship and like how do you bridge that many to one to make it seem like it's more like of a one-to-one sort of thing. And so I think like that kind of authenticity of being like, hey, like this is me just writing something to you. Hopefully you'll find this interesting, really kind of lands very well. And the nature of how that's packaged will change. It'll probably be different 5 years from now when everyone's going to, all of a sudden you know that this is actually just some giant thing and like there's no thought into it. And so there'll always be that, but there'll always be people who are cutting edge to think about like what actually feels kind of sincere and like is like the true voice and like that sort of stuff. And a lot of times it's a step back to being simpler, right? And it feels more like homey or whatever. Yeah.
I like that. Okay, couple of spicy takes on email marketing. Is there a belief in lifecycle marketing that you think is harmful for the industry?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I think, and I don't necessarily I think a lot of lifecycle marketers would agree with my statement. I think that a lot of brands end up in a bit of trouble where issues on the acquisition side means that they put a ton of pressure on the retention and lifecycle side. And so it's just like, they cut their spend for social media stuff, and that typically doesn't reflect itself into your CRM list until like 6 months later. And then all of a sudden, like you have these revenue issues and you're blaming your poor email marketers, but it's actually was decisions on acquisition that you made half a year ago. And then the response to that is to email everybody. And, about a year ago, Gmail and Yahoo and all of them like were very explicit about the rules that are going to change. And they were like, we don't care about opens or the type of opens that you guys measure yourself, right? Like you have to keep your spam rate notes like below this. They won't tell you any other details, so you can't game it. But it was just like the rules of just assuming that like you could just blast everyone if you're a bulk sender are much more strict. And we've now seen that a bunch of the other inboxes provide that. And so the actual expense of sending an email has gotten a lot higher. And the difference between that and an actual expensive channel like SMS or direct mail is that like you now don't have a guarantee that the people who would be the most responsive to your emails are going to see it.
Right.
And so everyone has to be much smarter about this sort of stuff. And so there's lots of like, I think there was a lot of lip service, not to say that there weren't practitioners of being smarter about targeting for email before, but now it's like a requirement. And like you can degrade your deliverability very, very quickly. You cannot build it up quickly. Right. And so within a weekend, you can sync it and be in spam.
Right.
And then you have to have the slow climb. And we have a lot of brands climb much faster than they could do on their own, but it's still not fast in order to do that. And so like, I think that don't view email as a quote unquote cheap channel. It's a channel that can be extremely powerful, but has this strong gatekeeper. And so while the cost from a dollar perspective might be low, it actually is a relatively high risk channel compared to other ones. Right. And pay for text messages, people are going to see them.
Right. No, that's great feedback. And I see that as well. And I've definitely experienced that, hey, we are having a slow month. Let's just blast everybody with emails. I had this. Okay.
Can I actually add one more hot take too? One more hot take.
Yeah. Do it.
Okay. One more hot take is that, and this is as a machine learning engineer, as your friendly former neuroscientist, there's a lot of talk about personalization. And I think that sort of stuff has an important role to play. But the way that I always think about this is that there's people at the top of your list and people at the bottom of your list. And actually, in either of those cases, the message itself and the content probably don't matter that much. And what I mean by that is that people at the bottom, there's like nothing that you could do to get them to engage. They're like dead to email, dead to SMS, dead whatever. Whether it's the channel itself, whether it's their interaction with your brand, it doesn't matter what you can tell it like it's 99% off, it doesn't matter. The people at the top, on the other hand, just need the touch point. Like I joke that like the people that are algorithms find at the top, you could just have a subject line that was like Patagonia still exists, and be like, oh yeah, Patagonia still exists. I'm going to go buy some Patagonia now, right? Where personalization and the offers and all that kind of stuff actually has the most impact is in the middle part of your list. Intuitively, that makes sense, right? It's just like a 10% discount versus a 15% discount is not going to change the number one person on your CRM list from buying from you, but it could change the 500,000th person from buying from you. And so being smart about where you actually put your efforts into that more personalization, the more offer testing is like the middle part of this. If it doesn't work there, then like it's not going to work below that, right? And it might not speak for anything above that.
That was a very nuanced take, and I love that. And I've always struggled with this concept of personalization where I'll tell you my hot take on this. I feel that if you are producing something that is going to be a big brand and at scale, you have to find a common truth with your audience.
Yes.
And that common truth has to be common enough for your message to resonate. If everything was like very hyper personalized, at least in terms of messaging and creative, then you probably haven't built something that is that scalable. right? Because you're
Right.
having to rely on personalization. So that's one sort of, hot take that I have, that I think most personalization is a little bit overdone. What you said was really interesting, which is personalization. I'll give you an example. Obviously, there are things that I like and styles that I like. And so if I'm shopping for new, shirts
Sure.
or t-shirts, and if you've figured that out based on my usage and you can personalize and send me new drops for just that thing, then there's a high likelihood that I will react to that. So it's more about the personalization of the actual product rather than the personalization of the message. And
Right.
and I think people don't think enough about that. Do you agree or disagree with what I'm saying?
I totally agree. And I think, like
I'll give you an example. In the B2B world, there's so much personalization that happens on LinkedIn. I get ads that say, "Hey, Pranav, other B2B companies do blah, blah." And I'm like, that was a useless use of personalization, because
right.
if you had actually focused on the thing that is unique about your product for me, I would be much more inclined, rather than personalization for the sake of personalization. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now.
I agree. I mean, listen, I think, and this is what, especially I think in the context of brand marketing, this is really critical. Like, there are lots of really great Super Bowl ads that are like tangentially about the product, but it's just more about like the presence and maybe the humor, and it's something that everyone can talk about the next day. And there's no personalization. Like, how horrible would it be if like
Exactly.
all of our cat cookies had different personalized quote unquote ads that we couldn't talk about how funny this, that, or that ad was? Like, it'd be terrible. And then on the flip side too, is that like Coca-Cola is enormously successful without doing any personalization, right? Like, you would just see the logo on the billboards when you're at like a Yankees game or whatever it is. And like, when you're thirsty, it comes top of mind. And like, that's what you do. And those are extremely effective ways of a kind of a shared, in Coca-Cola's in the cultural language about that sort of stuff. And like, that sort of stuff is so, so critical. And so to me, the personalization is like, it's like that can help in like the nuances when you're trying to up conversion basis point here or there. But all the brand marketing, all the big stuff is like, that's how you get the most bang for your buck, is starting at the top and top.
No, I love that. Okay, going a little bit into your own marketing, how do you all get new customers? Do you do email marketing? Now I'm curious.
Yeah, it's
Now we're getting to B2B world.
no, I know. Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, it's no, we don't. I mean, there's, for very good reasons, like, email marketing in the B2B world, or email outreach, is even tougher than it is for direct to consumers. Like, the rules for deliverability and spam filtering and all that kind of stuff are so high. And so like, you would just crush your deliverability like instantaneously. And so we don't do that. We actually focus a lot on partnerships and on events. And so like, we have a lot of great agency partners, we have a lot of great tech partners. And we find that events like, Shop Talk and NRF and Grow and all those sorts of things are like extremely beneficial. And that's how we do it. And then from that, they come around, they see our booth, they see all the other brands that we're working with, and they're like, oh, I like that brand. And they come talk to us about their sorts of issues. And so like, a lot of our marketing is really events driven and partnership driven.
All right, very cool. Well, I will offer you one thought that might be interesting for you to try out, because I really enjoyed this conversation. I think you could do a great job with creating your own content. And
Sure.
we're very different in the sense that we actually have, or at least for the last 6 months, we've been very conscious about building our own list.
Yeah.
And the way we build that list is we're essentially building all these different types of media, right? This podcast is one of them.
Totally.
We do office hours. We, produce some assets about like, hey, if you're trying to present at your next quarterly business review, here's a template you can use for talking about marketing effectiveness, right? Things of that nature.
Yeah.
Or like, imagine for your examples, like, hey, here's a roadmap template for experimentation software 26, right? Yeah. And we regularly get tens of subscribers to that content. And these are people just coming to our site and opting in, and then they get a newsletter every week about something that's unique and different, written in a founder style. So I would encourage you to do it. I think it'll actually work for you and amplify your stories.
We, so when our third co-founder, Aaron, who's co-CEO with me, he has a podcast and stuff like that. It's all very account based. Like, he was the president of Loop Returns and stuff like that. So it's like other e-com leaders and founders to do that. But like, on the docket for 2026, that I work with our CMO on, is like how to get me more out in front of that sort of stuff with newsletter, like for more like the science ML sort of angle. So like, Aaron is like such a well-known figure in like the e-com space, and then like to this point on the experimentation and testing and how does neuroscience and all the brain and all the ML stuff fit into it, like that is definitely a focus for us. Like we've done it a small amount. I'm here today talking about these sorts of things, but it's to lay the groundwork to like kind of emphasize that stuff in general. As like there's so many, as I said, there's so many more tools, there's so much more stuff. And it's like looking for the voices of like what do we actually think is going to make the difference and not make the difference, I think is like really difficult for brands to understand. And as someone who literally knows the math of how all this stuff works, like hoping to be helpful, at least in some regards there.
Makes a lot of sense. I would definitely tune in and listen to that. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about neuroscience themselves. So have you heard of this company called NeuroInsight?
No.
Is that name? Okay, so there's another Pranav, so my namesake, who I think he's the CEO of this company. I had him on the show, and what their company does is essentially, there's this whole world of pre-testing where if you're thinking about advertising or concepts, you test it with a few people before you launch it, nationally, what have you. And typically that's like a focus group and you ask questions and, you do that type of a style. Now there are people who do like, eye tracking or, sort of attention, sort of, tracking and so on and so forth. And NeuroInsight takes a different approach where they're essentially actually connecting to your brain. So they put sensors and they're monitoring what's happening in your brain while you're watching a piece of advertising or when you're listening to a story or a concept. And so, I think it makes a ton of sense. Now, the other Pranav is not a neuroscientist. You are. So I'm actually curious, what do you think are the pitfalls or maybe even sort of the benefits of the approach that they're taking versus the more survey and group, focus group style methodology? Where do you see sort of the alpha there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the alpha there is definitely on the emphasis for the emotional reaction and like that surprise elements I would talk about. Because like that would be what those sorts of systems, whether they're EEG or fMRI, I have no idea how they're doing the measurements are doing, but like those are sort of signals that you can actually directly measure from those sorts of tools. And so watching someone, watch an ad for Coca-Cola and not only know that like they like it because they said that they like it, but it's like their amygdala is going off and like they're about to cry, like those sorts of things you can kind of get at that sort of stuff. And so you can kind of understand at a much more fundamental level what might be the sort of physiological responses to some of the sort of content. And so, I think that's a very interesting aspect, especially as you're like are going through all sorts of different types of messages and types of branding you want to do. Like that, so something like that could be very helpful for that.
Now, my skepticism on that, and Pranav is a dear friend, so hopefully he won't mind that I'm saying this, is that how do you replicate a real world environment for you to get true neuro signals and physiological sort of signals? Do you think that that's possible, or do you think that there's limitations around that? I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, no, I think it's more limitations. Like I would view it, and I don't know the details on any of this, is like, to me, I think it would be really helpful in a directional sense, right? You have 5 pieces of content. You're trying to go for the one that is going to get the most bang for your buck, mostly to evoke some sort of response that you are interested in. And it's like that plus the sort of survey stuff to kind of understand which one of those things work. Understanding that like what you measure in the lab is not going to be what's actually real because people only have paying attention in the real world and they have other things going on. But you might know that it is better than the other content. And I think the important thing to understand too is that to kind of use all of these things in conjunction with each other. And I'll give a slightly different example from another very interesting company. It's in the skincare space, but they're like all biomedicine people. What they did is that there's really expensive tools to understand the way that your skin, like the topology of your skin and how different creams will react with that. And then what they did is they said, cool, we have all this data, costs us so much money to collect all this sort of stuff, very precise measurements. Now let's they'll take camera phone pictures of people's skin and match it to the very precise measurement. Well, the whole goal being, we now have this rotor tool that we do a transformation and know what it relates to the very precise. And that's the so it's like a balance of those sorts of things. So you don't have to use the crazy expensive tool every single time. You understand that transformation, and everyone has their own camera phone, right? And so once again, one of these sorts of tools could be like, you're doing these big studies, you're doing these big sort of things, combining that with a survey stuff, which is much more easier to implement, especially at scale. And you can kind of see how they relate to, oh, this effect size is really big here. It translates into this effect size into this sort of survey stuff. And therefore we think that's going to actually affect this when we actually release it out live.
Love it. Okay. Last question before we wrap this up. If you could run absolutely any marketing experiment that you wanted to, what would it be and why?
Okay. So I'm obsessed, and this is like where I want to take our company directionally is I'm really obsessed with taking us to extremely hard to difficult to measure channels. So right now we're in email, we're in SMS, we're in direct mail. We'll do ads soon and retargeting and exclusion lists and stuff like that. But like decisions around, out of home media, billboards, all that kind of stuff are next. Podcasts, I my fantasy is that we can be like, hey Chime, you should actually have, your logo on the Mavericks and not the Lakers. And it's actually like a data driven, like, you know what I mean? Like these big, like, should DraftKings have LeBron James or whom, like those sorts of things? Like they're crazy. It's like crazy ideas, but like understanding the demographics of like who are they responsive to, tying all that information across all the different channels in order to make like really crazy strategic decisions at that sort of scale. I think that stuff is actually really exciting. And I think that a lot more math than now, because there's no math done to do it. I think that a lot more math can be used to inform those sorts of decisions. And like, those are the sorts of experiments that I would love, which is like, yeah, let's put like a billboard for Yankees like every other game and then see what happens and like do all that kind of testing to see like if it actually is impactful.
Very cool. Very cool. Our worlds are colliding. So this is great.
Yeah.
All right, DB. So how do people find Orita? Where do they go if somebody's interested in, trying you out? What do they do?
Yeah. So, Orita.ai is our website. We, we're a preferred partner with Klaviyo. We have an app in their ecosystem. You can also find it through the marketplace there. We do a free audit for every single one of our brands, which means that like it takes you 2 minutes to connect your data from Klaviyo to us, and then we build a machine learning model, and we can go over the results with you. It's candidly just as much for our benefit as for the brands. We want to deliver a ton of value. If your lists are too small, you don't have enough history, if everyone on your list is acting identically the same all the time, machine learning is not necessary to get them on their list. And so like, that's kind of what I always suggest is like, if you're interested in us, go check out our website, go connect yourself for a free audit. We'll chat on a call, in a week or two after that, and then we can see if we can help.
All right, awesome. So go, everybody, check out Orita, ORITA.ai, and go get yourself a free audit. That's an amazing offer. Well done.
Yeah.
All right, DB, thank you for joining me on this podcast. This was a lot of fun. I'm very excited about what you all are building. So we're going to maybe have you again in a few months and see how those crazy experiment ideas have come about.
If you see flickering billboards and like, you're like, I swear this was yesterday and what's going on, that means that like my vision has finally made it. So yeah.
Love it. Love it.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, folks, that was Daniel Brady, or DB, at Orita. Go check out Orita and tune in again next week for another fantastic episode of Brandformance. See you then.